This is the Community Builder Podcast with Travis King. I sit down with world-class community builders who are bringing together the tribes of the future. Oh, they're also restoring human connection one conversation at a time. This podcast exists to serve as a resource to myself and others to learn from, and also come along for a fun, insightful journey. Whenever I stumble across a topic or skill that I'm interested in learning, or a juicy problem I'd like to solve, I go straight to the source. This is an audio journal of stories from amazing community builders who all carry wisdom, insights, and knowledge to serve as a communal compass to help you find your direction. On this episode, I'm testing a new skill, and that's content creation. At least that's the name of this game. So with that, here's my first run at a fully solo produced episode. Up to this point, every episode that you've seen has been released and produced by the podcast press team. So let's get into the show. Quick shout outs and thank yous. First to Nicolette Orlemans for taking the time to chat with me. To Tim Ferriss for providing me with the DISC method, which is my go-to framework for learning. Canva for providing a platform to help me shape my ideas into better stories through pictures. Adobe Audition, which I'm using to actually edit this episode. And also to Nathaniel Dodson for making your audio and voice sound better Audition CC tutorial video. Also Pippa.io, where they provide the best podcast hosting, analytics, and ads, helping thousands of podcasters, including myself, grow our audiences and earn more from our shows. These are not sponsors of the podcast, just references to things that I've talked about during the episode or that I've learned along the way. Let's get into the show. The way.
Oh yeah, go for it.
But yeah, you can just keep going.
So it was a lot of reading Malcolm Gladwell to begin with. Then you move into Adam Grant, who did originals. And then you go, now I'm reading Tim Ferriss, which is great. Surprised that I didn't read his book or any of his books up until now, because I've been listening to his podcast, and the other podcast that I love is How I Built This on NPR. I think it's an amazing podcast that people should listen to, regardless if they're entrepreneurs or budding entrepreneurs, because you can learn a lot from it.
Oh yeah, I think stories are one of the hidden gems of our generation. We can learn so much from stories because we all experience them from our own eyes. It's just like
Right.
so insane how much we can learn so fast. And it's crazy because we often get caught up and think that like no one else could see it this way, like no one else could understand it, but you'll be surprised at how many other people can connect with the way you saw that story.
Oh yeah, and also when it comes to travel in particular, what I always like is talking to people about the same destinations that we may have seen, but like you said, everyone kind of has a unique story about it, and so you may have both gone to Barcelona but had very different experiences, and that's really always really interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting too is that like each experience like puts another piece or like adds another chapter to your story, which also changes the dynamic of your personality, which I think can throw people for a spin if they're not used to it. Because I know when I first experienced like after travel, if you will, whatever you want to call it, I didn't really know what was happening. And so it was tough for a little bit. But then once I realized that I now see the world from a different lens, that it's okay to see it this way. And I now have, more diverse point of view.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the beauty of travel too. And I even talking to people who say that they don't have a big budget or that they can't afford to travel very far. I mean, we live in a country where different states almost have their own kind of interesting identities. So you could in a few hours be in a completely different state. And I don't think that traveling domestically is is a bad idea. It also reveals a bit about where you're from and how different people are, but it's a cool way of kind of learning more about your own roots as well.
Yeah, totally. And speaking of roots, definitely always love going all the way back to where people started, right? Like when you start a story, it's always unique and everyone always starts in a different place. I like to think of the Hunger Games and how people come from different factions. And I don't know why, but that like story always resonates with me. So definitely would love to start off by sharing, Nicolette, like what was it like growing up for you? Like how did you get started? Like what's the start of your story?
Yeah, so I grew up in a bilingual household in the Netherlands. My mom is Polish, my dad's Dutch, so I was raised bilingually. My parents were always traveling a lot throughout Europe, and so I feel like they are very much responsible for the sense of wanderlust that I have and I've always had since I was a kid. We traveled really often. In fact, they started traveling with me when I was a baby to Poland so that my grandparents could officially meet me. And then in 2000, we moved to the US for my dad's work. And that really started our expat life here. So I feel like travel has always been something that I feel very grateful and excited to do. And with that said, the thing that I enjoy connecting with other people about is travel because it's always so interesting to me that as people, and I mentioned this earlier, we go to similar destinations, but we can have such unique experiences. And that to me kind of signifies the beauty of travel and getting to know local culture in our own way. So I love being able to talk to other people about that experience and really connect.
Awesome. I love that. And for people that I feel like oftentimes it's tough when you don't know where to go or, what to look for when it comes to travel. So I guess could you talk a little bit about some of the things that you learned early on, I guess from your parents about like wanderlust as a child, like little tips that you might have picked up early on that other people might now be like, oh yeah, duh, I should do this when I travel.
Yeah, so I think what people can really do before they even travel is read a lot. And, you know, in that sense, even if you pick up a book, it can really open up your mind as to how a, another destination may be. And you could look at local literature of a destination, or you could specifically think about, there's so much content out nowadays. You can look up blogs, you can do a lot of research and reading to really get a sense of what a place is like. So I think it requires just being kind of curious about the world at large and talking to people, and even just going to local meetups in the town or city that you're in and talking about travel or talking about people's experiences that they may have had, and sort of familiarizing yourself with different destinations and different stories. I think it's more about, intrinsically connecting with people offline, and really getting to know people and hearing their stories.
Yeah, I think stories is the the key theme from what I'm picking up there, and I guess could you talk to us a little bit about some stories that some of your favorites that you've picked up along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I always love the idea of the 6 degrees of separation concept. So the idea that we're all connected to each other in some way, shape, or form. And I love hearing stories of people meeting each other, across the world. Or I think one of my favorite stories is of two friends of mine who connected with each other when they were both in Berlin. One was there for a summer internship, and the other person was there for a different summer internship. One of them was a friend of mine from college, and the other one was a friend from high school. And they somehow ended up meeting each other. And I got Facebook messages from both of them. I remember this on the same day saying, wow, we're in Berlin here. We just found out that we know each other because we started talking about school. Um, and there's other stories like that, where people learn that they have some kind of mutual connection, and that connection may be someone that's halfway around the world and they don't know it. So I think the world is a lot smaller sometimes than people give it credit for in that sense. And you can really connect with people on a level nowadays, with help of technology, but also with help of just talking to people and going out there and traveling and getting to know people on another level.
Definitely love knowing people on another level, because like it's so simple.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing too, Lauren and I just experienced this as well. It's crazy how when you go to another place, you want to connect with people, but when you're in your backyard, you don't want to talk to the couple that's next to you.
Right? It's always interesting.
It's so interesting to me. It's so fascinating. Um, so I guess switching gears a little bit, let's talk about what community means to you.
So to me, I think it comes back to community being a place where people can talk freely. So it's not only a space where people can share stories and get inspired, but it's also a space where people can feel supported. They can share advice, they can ask questions, and they can rely on each other for feedback. And the interesting thing about community is that it doesn't have to be this like homogenous thing, meaning that I think there's room for people to have differences in opinion or even perspectives, but it should still be a place where people feel comfortable talking to each other no matter the differences. And, if there's room for healthy debate, then so be it. But I think it needs to be a space where people can and should talk freely without feeling judged, without feeling like they're cornered into something. Like it should be a space where you can share stories and feel connected to other people.
I agree so much with that. And to add on top, what are some ways that people can, do some of the things that you mentioned? Like, what are some ways they can talk freely? How can they help people feel supported? What are some ways or methods to share advice, ask questions, like whichever ones like jump out at you?
I think it needs to be encouraged, open conversations and free flowing conversations really need to be encouraged by people that are community leaders. They don't necessarily need to have that title, but I think it's important for someone to carry the conversation or encourage people to share stories. And it doesn't necessarily have to be one person. It could be, multiple people that just have more of a naturally free flowing vibe to them. But there has to be some way for people to feel excited about sharing stories, or even if the stories are a bit more, deeper or emotional, feeling safe and like they have room to have that conversation or be able to share the story. So I think it helps a lot to be able to connect with people who have similar interests. But at the same time, I also always emphasize that it could also be interesting to talk to people who may not necessarily share the exact same interest or who just have a different perspective on it. I think it's just about being open and receptive to opinions. And, there's some people who like to talk more and debate other people a bit more. And there's other people who prefer a, a much more easygoing conversation. And I think the community leader or whoever is organizing the community should have a good understanding of the people that are part of that community and what makes them feel comfortable talking to other people.
Yeah, I really love that. And it's funny too, because I have a little quick, I guess, snippet story from when I was at a community focused company. And there was a team that
Mhm.
was working on a project that was focused on bringing together employees within companies. So think of like a meetup
Mhm.
inside of your own company. So just like formerly known as
Got it.
employee resource groups, most companies like at a larger size that have a more developed HR and a culture that have if you've been around for a little bit
Mhm.
longer, you find that these sorts of companies have some of these in place. And the interesting thing about this project was that they were doing it around people's interests. So imagine like a daytime story time while you're at work for your passion. So people did
Mhm.
things like we talked about when This Is America by Childish Gambino. When that video came out, there was a lot of buzz and a
Mhm.
lot of conversation. And we actually did, quick little event, like a quick little meetup where we discussed and talk about, how we each saw the video. And there was, 12 or 13 of
Right.
us in the room, all with different perspectives. And it was, I think it was like 6 o'clock right after work. But it gave us a space to talk about something that was outside of work and brought us all closer together around that common interest.
Mhm.
And I had people in the room from development. We had people from the community team. We had salespeople. We had marketers. We had project managers, all talking about Childish Gambino.
Mhm.
You know, and
Right.
so and like one of the kind of the key point that I want to share with people is that the person organizing this, each time there was a different organizer, which was very unique as well, because the team that
Mhm.
was putting it together
Oh, wow.
had, a set of resources that was focused on making sure the organizers, understood the people that were attending the event, and they could curate it in such a way that everybody could have an equal experience and feel as comfortable as they, felt given, their background, circumstances, etc. So yeah, I
Right.
definitely think like bringing community and getting people excited about sharing stories, and also seeing different perspectives about, I was in a room again with people talking about their passion projects, and I was like, oh wow, like I didn't think that you would want to make a card game, or I didn't think that you would want to write short
Right.
stories, So definitely really am bullish on people giving their employees space at work. I'm going to repeat that again because this is like a thing in like the B2B world that you don't hear a lot, is that like at work, like this is a space where you want people to be productive and efficient and focused on your mission. But remember that people spend the
Right.
majority of their days at work, at your company. And so
Exactly.
realizing ways that we can enhance and help bring people closer together and show you that it's like really only 30 minutes a day that you could do this, then you could really help so many people. I think it's such a valuable little tip to share.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the fact that you mentioned that you learned so much about different team members that you may not necessarily interact with every day or even, every week is so neat. And I think it's really important for employers to remember that people have lives outside work and that sometimes the interests that people have may even be beneficial for use at the company. I mean, you may want to pull in different team members when you're ideating or when you're brainstorming different ideas or when you're working on different projects. Why not bring in a team member from the product team plus, the marketing team plus a developer plus a salesperson, et cetera, because you do get the different perspectives and who knows what may
Right.
come out of the
And I definitely
meeting.
think it's I think it's a kind of like a good segue into talking a little bit about the different tribes that exist, and kind of speaking more specifically about tribes. Would definitely love to hear a little bit more about the culture tribe that you founded and started off of the Twitter chats. I remember, right, the Twitter conversations back in 2014. I think you mentioned when we talked.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, back in 2014, I started really participating more in Twitter chats, which are these online real time conversations that are happening over a specific hashtag at a set date and time. Now, that's a lot to remember, but what they do is essentially you can connect with people by using the same hashtag in a Q&A format. So you, for example, the chat can have a theme around, say, street art, and you can have entire conversations with people all over the world about street art over this hashtag. So it's a really fun way for people to connect with other people, sharing their perspectives. And as people respond with the associated hashtags, other people can start talking to them, asking questions, having broader conversations. Um, and travel is something that's really easy to talk about because it tends to be something that people are very passionate about. And travelers often reflect on how they personally grow from visiting many different destinations and learning from different cultures. So it's especially easy to talk about travel in
Yeah,
that
and I
sense.
also too wanted to talk real quick about your the Kickstarter that you launched, the Travel Banter game, because this is something that also during the little internal events like the meetups that I mentioned that I participated in, there was also another game that we played, and it really helped us like literally just realize that like these cards can help guide the conversation. Like a set of cards can bring
Exactly.
together people and lead a conversation. So like just that example of like you created a game or a card game back in October of 2018. I definitely want to let you talk about that
Mhm.
and share, kind of the story behind that.
Yeah, so the Kickstarter for Travel Banter, it was really inspired by the online conversations that my Culture Tribe community has had over the years. So I launched the very first Twitter chat back on November 13th, 2014. I still remember the day. And I really wanted people to have conversations at a deeper level where they talked about, what really helps us get to know local culture of a different, destination that we visit. So the chat is still happening. It's happening every week, every Thursday. There's travelers connecting from all over the world and sharing conversations. And travel banter, which is kind of the byproduct of those conversations, I see that as a real life version of the Twitter chats. And it really helps people have fun and meaningful conversations around the topic of travel and getting to know local culture. And like you said, it's such a exciting and easy tool to use to get to know people that you may otherwise not have heard their stories
Right.
from.
And I also think it's like such an easy way to give people that first step into what it's like to be vulnerable and share their experiences. Because this is another thing that you kind of don't really know how to do unless you do it multiple times, at least from my
Mhm.
experience.
Exactly. And we don't naturally, gravitate toward a conversation starter game. It's something that requires a bit of nudging and a bit of an introduction. I think, as soon as people start playing the game, they can't really stop and they get excited and it's something fun, but it's not necessarily something that a lot of people think they need. In fact, I've had people say, "Well, I don't need a conversation starter. I can talk to people about work and the weather." And to me, there's nothing wrong with talking about work, but I think you can have lots of interesting, inspiring conversations around things like travel and interesting street art that you've seen, delicious meals you've had on the road, fun road trips you've been on. There's so many more opportunities to really get to
Yeah,
know
I
people
think the
on a deeper
deepness
level.
scares people away a lot. And that's something that I've been, I guess, more so observing rather than trying to solve as of late, because I've realized that in order to
Mm-hmm.
solve any sort of problem, you have to experience it enough times. And for me, I don't think I've experienced that enough. And so now I'm just like, okay, how can we make it so simple for people to see that this is no different than like brushing your teeth or drinking water? Like connecting and having conversations is normal. So like it's not normal now.
Right.
Slack conversations, iMessage chats, Instagram group chats, WeChat, you
Right.
chat, your cousin chats, all the chats. This is how people communicate now. And so like actual conversations like
Right.
don't happen offline as much. And when they do, they're often filled with negativity and the I don't even know what else because I forgot what those are like. Um, yeah.
Awkwardness, like people feel weird talking face to face about things sometimes. I have a funny quick anecdote that I'll share that actually happened today, but somebody was coming by from this organization. They were going door to door trying to sell people on something, and I opened the door and the guy said, "Look, I know we're in 2019 and it's really weird for people, to just try to try to solicit and still knock on your door, but this is what we're about. I'll keep it very quick because, do you have a minute to talk?" So I did the guy a favor. I talked to him for a little bit and he said, "It's surprising how often people will slam a door in our face, or how awkward or weirded out people are when we strike up a conversation and try to talk to them about the environment, or
Yeah,
it just happens."
it's almost upsetting, but it's one of those things. It's you can only do as much as you can with the resources and the time you have. And so, like what I've also been experimenting with a little bit is just try to put myself in the other people's shoes. And one, I guess, like hack, if you will, that I've
Hmm.
learned to do that. I guess the way I've learned to do that is by imagining it like a scene in a movie and just imagine that I'm that person and
Mm.
I saw the same scene that they saw and I lived what they lived and just see how I would think.
Hmm. Yeah. No, and I think that's awesome. I feel like that's lacking a lot these days. So it's really cool to hear that you're doing that, and to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and kind of almost look at yourself from someone else's perspective is really neat. Or look at what they might be thinking and
Yeah, and I think that's also tough
ask.
too because often it's like that, ooh, am I overstepping my boundary by asking this vulnerable and deep question? Like anybody that knows me knows I'm like the king of deep conversation and I often go way too deep, way too fast. But like knowing that I was known for that, I'm now learning to back up and realize that like you can't
Mhm.
just go to level 58, Trav, on the first conversation. So it's definitely like a good thing to remember and learn. And that's like definitely speaking to so many lessons that, being a traveler yourself, like you learn so many lessons in so many different places. Like you have probably hundreds of stories just in one picture.
Right. I mean, there there is a lot, but at the same time, what's interesting too is that, so the thing that I like to think of, and it kind of relates to what you were saying, but behind every social media profile is a real person. And that is something sometimes that people at a basic level forget. And you have to ask yourself questions like, what stories does this person have to share, and how can we connect with each other on a deeper level? How do I know what these person's interests are? What excites this person? So, there's a lot of different platforms out there and constantly evolving technology. But I think at the very essence of it, people continue to crave real conversations no matter the platform. So, yes, there's technology and there's tons of new social media. Um, algorithmic changes and constant updates. But I think no matter what, it's really important to keep inspiring people to keep sharing stories, whether it's online or offline, and to not forget that storytelling is at the core of everything we do. I mean, when we're trying to sell a product, there's a story behind it. When we're trying to help someone out, we're trying to figure out what this person's needs are, what the larger story is. And we connect with people over shared experiences, and we learn from each other when we have different experiences. So I think when we hear stories that we can relate to, we feel inspired
Yeah, I
to
think
share
that's
our
such a
own
huge
stories as
thing.
well.
And there's another one from the meetup now, the events that they did. There was one about I think it was misrepre or underrepresentation in media. So like, do you see yourself on the big screen? And like, you had people from all different backgrounds sharing their stories of, who do you see on the big screen that looks like you, and what did that do to your life? So right, exactly to your point.
Right. Yeah. No, and I think that's actually a really interesting thing to think about as well. And, encouraging more people to share their stories. There are lots of different platforms to do it, but I still think that connecting with people offline is a hugely important thing, just to also understand who we are, how we evolve over time, and
Yeah.
how
And I
we
think the other
interact
thing
with
too,
people.
one thing that I've learned along the way. Oh, thank you. Okay, sorry. My robot friend almost picked me up, and I was just like, she was moving, but I didn't want to say her name because then she would have turned on. But side note, um, as I was trying to learn and find, like, how do I, figure out, what I'm doing? Like, how do I figure out, this community thing? I was like, I got to figure out kind of like who has done this, right? Like, so I guess, could you talk to some of the communities, if any, that
Right.
you look up to, and why?
Yeah, so surprise, surprise, these are all going to be in the travel space because uh, that's what I connect with a lot, and it's in my space a lot. So the communities that come to mind are, for me, one of them is Travel Massive, which is a worldwide organization that brings travel industry professionals together. They host meetups, they have events, and they have just a lot of amazing travel professionals that you can hang out with, whether it's writers, journalists, bloggers, PR professionals in the industry. And what's nice is at their events, you really get to know people and you bond over your love of travel. And they have chapters really all over the world. So it's a cool organization to be a part of because you can join different meetups for free in different countries. They're all over the U.S. too. Another community that I really like is a community called Wonderful. It's especially designed and created for women travelers. They also have chapters all over the world. And I think what resonates the most is that I've met some amazing women at their in person meetups and at their annual summit as well. So you really get to connect with other women travelers and talk about what you're working on, and just exchange travel stories, which when it comes down to it, for me, I think that's really the most exciting part of it all, is just being able to talk about different experiences you've had and bond with people over it. And I think finally, the other community that comes to mind is the Impact Travel Alliance. What I like about them is their larger mission to empower travel industry professionals to really think about and be mindful of the local environment and local communities that they are essentially affecting, and when they travel, and really thinking of the idea of social good and leaving a positive social impact on different destinations that we visit. So being very conscious of the environment and local communities when you
Yeah,
travel
I
to
think that's
different
such one that I just
destinations.
learned recently about when I was traveling to Puerto Rico. And it's just like the different sorts of impact. Like, for example, I asked the waiter for a straw, and he literally told me he had to go ask his manager if he could give me a
Right.
straw because they moved to strawless. And I was like, oh,
Oh wow.
okay.
Right. Yeah, that's a big movement. Now there's a lot of talk about, and a lot of people using metal straws, and even travelers that I know being incredibly eco-friendly and conscious of the literal footprint that they're leaving when they visit different destinations. So, bringing your own water bottle, bringing special filters to filter the water, so you're not using a single-use bottle. Just being mindful of little things that we may not necessarily think about on a daily basis, but little things can have a
Totally.
really big impact.
One of the podcasters I met, Greg Clunis, he wrote a book, Tiny Leaps, Big Changes. It reminded me of that. Nice.
Right,
So
right,
a couple of the last
exactly.
questions that we have here. One thing I always love asking guests that are in super exciting spaces like travel, are recent trends. So could you talk to us a little bit about some of the recent trends that you've been following?
Yeah, so I think, 2019, we did see some of it last year as well. And I mean, video has been important for a while, but I feel like now you can read new developments or new things about video happening more and more. And while video itself isn't new, I've been seeing a lot more video sharing. I've been seeing it a lot more on LinkedIn, which is kind of interesting. And I still feel like the video sharing that's happening is heavily focused on telling stories and doing that in a very authentic way. And I always emphasize with different people that I've worked with that it's not enough to just post something and hope that the content sticks. You have to be able to draw people in with a story or a relatable anecdote. So I think the video trend and people doing more and businesses doing more as video could be a very positive one if people remember that at the very essence of what you do, you should be thinking about what is the story and how am I providing value for other people with what I'm doing.
That's so important too to remember that like this is something that I struggled with, Nicolette. Like getting started was like the hardest thing in the world. Like remember I
Mhm.
told you I went to my phone. What was it? I
Oh
have
yeah.
6,490 videos, and like I don't know how many pictures. Like I don't know.
Wow.
I have 30,438 places. And so I'm like, this is
Wow.
something that I didn't know how to do. And so now I'm just like, my story was that like
Right.
I'm now learning how to produce content. But the other big key, and I really want to talk about this because this
Mm-hmm.
came up this week, is producing content at the scale that you see it, like in a
Mm-hmm.
Gary V, but in a reality that you have a full-time job.
Oh yeah.
Because I mean,
Yep.
I don't know how many followers. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
let's actually. This is fun. I see this on the Joe Rogan podcast when they pause for a second and then they go to their computers and they look at stuff. So, so Gary V, he
They're
has
typing away.
5.6 million followers. Out of these followers, I would love to see the data, and we probably
Mm-hmm.
could get it at some point. I guarantee, like half of them probably
Yep.
have full time jobs.
Probably. And they're trying to figure out a way
Yep.
to potentially leave or, improve their whatever situation
Exactly.
that they're in.
And so that's
Let's
another
be
real big
realistic.
piece of the conversation that I also feel like isn't being discussed as much, and definitely want to share some of that here, because now think about this. You have now 2.3 million people that are fighting the message that they hear from a guy that's inspiring them, and they want to also do that, but they don't know, they're like one step in the journey in their specific field, and they barely know how to like share their own message, so they want to like share it with the world and like do all this other stuff. And so I feel like there can be like it could be a double-edged sword for people
Right.
that see this. And so I guess one lesson that I learned was that you can only go as fast as the skills that you learned up until that moment allows you to go.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think nowadays, too, you brought up a good point where it can be hard if you have a full time job to also pursue a side hustle or share a different type of story on social media because you may feel that you're being scrutinized for it, or it you may feel awkward posting things on social media even though it is the space that you have carved out for yourself. It is still a very public space depending on the network that you're on. So I can definitely see it being this double-edged sword where you want to express whatever interests you have beyond work, but you also are mindful and respectful of your employer. And so, it is this balancing act of what can I post and how can I share things that are interesting to me without this potential conflict of interest as seen
Right.
from the
And the funny
employer
thing,
side of it.
whenever I think about this topic or conversation, is that if you talk to your employees, companies, you would know that they care about these things. Period. That's it. And so like that is
Right.
like a huge lesson, just for a lot of people, because I think one thing that I'm going to start to try to do more is for the other people that are trying to start something with full-time jobs or whatever you want to call it, like you don't know where to start. I'm thinking about figuring out a way to give them, a platform or a place to start. And so like one thing is, like you said, the Twitter chats. Like you guys could start a Twitter chat about whatever topic you want,
Right.
and it could just be your space. And if the first 50 Twitter chats, it's only you and yourself, you now have an archive of 50 pieces of thoughts that you can go back to and learn from.
Right. Exactly. But you start somewhere and it starts small, but then it grows into, a larger community, or it doesn't have to be this huge community, but it becomes a space where people feel connected with each other
Right. And I guess that
on a
that goes back to one
different
of my other
level.
questions, is like how we keep people connected. So I guess this actually would be fun. So this actually is kind of like one of the first of its kind episodes on the podcast, to where I'm going to put out the episode as soon as we are finished. So this is a completely 100% live
Oh,
run. So
wow.
once this gets
That's
wrapped
awesome.
up, I'm going to go and get my podcast post-production Travis hat going, um, and go ahead and put it out, and hopefully try to get it out and then see kind of what the response is like compared to normal, where I go through post-production. I definitely know, for the people that have their episodes in the queue, this is just going to be a bonus episode, pre-apologizing for any of you if this might make you upset. Just a lot of stuff I learned in the process now, where I feel like I could just put out an episode in the same day, like give you a quicker turnaround. So this is just me experimenting with that. So hopefully it turns out good. So listeners, let me know what you think with a review or a tweet or whatever, how else you give feedback. I'm sure I'll have an episode about that later. But so what I'd like to do is just spit off some quick ideas for how we can stay connected. So like you say one, then I'll say one, and then we'll go for 30 seconds. Okay, so we'll start, and I'll give us a 5-second countdown, and then you'll start first with a way to stay connected, and then I'll go after, and I'll have to say a different one. You ready?
Okay.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Slack.
In-person meetup.
Facebook.
Twitter chats.
Go.
You stole my
Instagram.
Facebook groups.
The coffee shop.
LinkedIn video. Good old fashioned
the cups with the strings attached. And how about a walk on the beach?
How about a picnic in the
30
park?
seconds. That was fun. This should actually be really fun. I'm going to actually figure out a way to build this into more episodes and either pick the same question or pick a different one. Actually, that would be cool. I couldn't use the same question and I have to keep getting new information. And so that way people could refer back to this piece as like an archive of different quick tips in 30 seconds that I shared with the guest. Nice.
Right.
Nice.
Oh,
see,
awesome.
You take little pieces of what you learn, turn it into your own, and then share it, and then take feedback, and then figure out what's next. So speaking of what's next, what's up next for you, Nicolette?
So something that I am very excited about and that I always like to do is help people better understand the value of community building. And, whether that's online or offline community building, I'd love to teach people about that. And whether it's businesses and how businesses can engage people in a more meaningful way, how you can create a platform for people to engage and inspire people to have conversations, whether it's about your brand or product or just about the sense of community. And I always like to emphasize that, it's not about self-promotion. It's really about creating value for other people and for other people to feel a closer connection. So, like I said before, fundamentally, I think people will always care to have deeper conversations with others. So encouraging those connections to happen is something that I think will continue to excite people.
I'm super excited to see some of that. And also, we can talk offline because I have another project. I feel like I freaked out one of my friends the other day. I told her I was doing an experiment. And I just look at it from like lean startup methodology. Like I look at new projects and ideas as experiments. And so I'm looking to do an experiment to where I take the lessons and the what's next from my guests and turn them into something in the actual real world. Don't know what they are. It could be something as simple as a Google Sheet or an Airtable, which I'm actually doing right now with some music artists because I'm looking for people who want to share their music, and I'm going to put them on the intros and the outros of each episode. So I have an Airtable going, and I have definitely people to get back to now to like put them on there. I'm just trying to figure out a way to collect the information in a way that I can give people access to share their music with everybody. So definitely we can talk offline about that. Wow, and then this is the last part of the show. Neat. So this is the freestyle part where, again, another experiment, still learning here. So this is where I'm giving Nicolette the opportunity to insert any current challenge that she's facing, what her dream community or initiative would look like, or anything else that she would like to chat about. So this is your space, Nicolette. So I'm going to, hand it over to you.
Well, I think something that a lot of people will be able to relate to that's a constant challenge for me is the issue of time. So nowadays, I think it's very easy to get distracted by things and lose time, or get sucked into whatever it is that you're working on and lose a bit of time. So I think what's important is that you give yourself some time to also let your mind wander, which is actually the opposite of time management. But I think having a moment where your mind and body can have a break is really important. So, and then, it can be very energizing. You can go back to work feeling like you have a singular focus on something you care about, and it feels more motivating and energizing. And I think when you find that singular focus, that feels very motivating. And it's easier said than done, but it's a really
I
good
love that so
feeling to
much
have that.
because that is exactly what I have just been experiencing this last week. And just taking the time to go into deep work, just read or listened to Deep Work by Cal Newport. And he really talks about going into these, times where you are just inside of whatever you're doing. It totally consumes you. And for me, that's journaling. And
Right.
so I have 6 notebooks. I don't think that's a lot by any means, but to some people that's a lot. And I journal everything. Like, that's how I learn and that's how I remember. And so for me, like, journaling was the way for me to get distracted. Like, I can go back to the pencil in my hand and the 0.5 millimeter lead on the page and start back right where I picked up every single time. It's weird. And once you like have stuff to write about, I can just keep going. And literally, like, I could, have a conversation with Lauren and then go right back into my notebook after, we're done, and continue writing what I just did.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very freeing feeling, though, to be able to just jot down your thoughts and feelings like that in such a
it's definitely very freeing and nice to know that I just now have to figure out how to optimize my time. As you were saying, it's something that we easily forget and lose track of what's important and what's crucial, to then know that now I'm going through my my deconstruction phase, which shout out to Tim Ferriss for that method that I use a lot and definitely refer to, and we'll start to share more with everyone because that's how I learn. And Tim Ferriss, for those of you that don't know, created a methodology called the DIS framework. And so it's an acronym. It stands for deconstruction, selection, sequencing, and stakes. And it's a system that he used to learn anything faster. And so I've also used that system and I apply that to everything. And so now I realize that I'm just in the deconstruction phase in a lot of different areas of my life, and that I don't know all the pieces yet. But what I'm starting to do is put the ones I do know in the order and give myself little stakes and timelines to put them out there to keep everything moving forward. So I guess as an example, this episode, right? Before we recorded it, I wasn't thinking about posting immediately right after we produced it. But as we went along, I was like, what would it be like if I put out the episode right after we recorded it? Then I was like, the tool that I have automatically transcribes it so people can already get the show notes. We already did the show notes also because we prepped, and it's so much faster if I just put it out there and it's, fresh. And I was like, wait, I learned all the building blocks. I now did them in the right order and I can put them out there. And so, like, here it is.
Well, it's awesome. And I think, talking about time, it also frees up your time to
Totally.
do
And
other
I think
things
that's so important. And like, time is like one thing that we can't get back. And it's just a thing that, actually, speaking of time, this is a very fun plug. And I've always wanted to do this. Tim Ferriss is actually coming to New York to talk with Julie Rice from WeWork, and they will be sitting down and discussing tools you can use. A conversation with Tim Ferriss and Julie Rice. They're going to be talking about different productivity hacks that they've, went through, and they talk, work tactics, productivity tools, time management. And so like this event's happening on May 5th down at the Made by We location at 902 Broadway at 6 p.m. So I'll also have a link to this in the show notes that you guys can sign up and get tickets for this. So yeah, this is right up my alley. And so now I'm just learning different ways and events like this. I'm going to more events like this to then pick up more knowledge and tools that I can bring back and apply in my actual life. So just a quick plug, I feel like contextually relevant to this episode. And yeah, hopefully you guys, if you're in the city, definitely would recommend you guys checking it out. Great. Well, Nicolette, this was so really awesome. Cool. And before we hop off here, is there anything else that you want to share before I get into this last little surprise section that I've been waiting for?
No, awesome. I'm eager to hear about the surprise.
One thing that I mentioned I've been experimenting and trying to learn is the art and skill of podcasting. And so to do that, I've looked at a lot of different, podcasters and people that I've looked up to and listened to shows, people like Tom Bilyeu from his podcast, and from Tim Ferriss, and to Gary Vee. And I've always, wanted to have this like bomb introduction for my guests. And I was like, you know what? Like, you can do this. So Nicolette, this is going to be my first run at an introduction, and I'm going to save it for the last part, but people that are listening, they can obviously go to the end and find this. But hopefully moving forward, I'll be able to do an introduction like this and just improve upon it. And then we'll hop off, and then this will be the end of the show.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks
so again, thanks everyone for hopping on. Really and now I would like to introduce Nicolette. She is the founder of the weekly Twitter chat Culture Trav, which brings travelers together to discuss their cultural travel experiences. It is an extension of the chat. Nicolette launched culturetrav.co, an online community website focused on stories about immersion in local culture. In late 2018, Nicolette launched a Kickstarter for Travel Banter, a conversation starter game inspired by her Culture Trav community. Outside of travel, Nicolette works in social media strategy and loves to help others build their social communities. She has helped launch online communities in healthcare, insurance, travel, and lifestyle magazine industries. Please welcome and thank for sharing this space with us, Nicolette.